Hello and welcome. My name is Emmanuel Lee, and I'm the Program Manager of Healthy Grocery Initiative at the nonprofit Mandela Partners. And this is an open forum on the Americans with Disabilities Act and how retailers are held accountable to it. So the reason why our program is hosting a forum like this is because some of the retailers that we've worked with have come to us and said that either they themselves or someone they know had been sued for non-compliance with the ADA law. And we've, because of that information, we've invited Tim today to discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act and just bring awareness to what retailers need to be aware of for this. So I'll allow Tim to introduce himself, and then I will cast a poll just to see who's in the room, and then we'll allow Tim to dive deeper into the topics.
Hello all, my name's Tim Griffith. I'm currently a professional ADA consultant and primarily for businesses and governments. My history, my background, I was the chief building official for the city of Hercules for several years, and I was also the principal inspector for Contra Costa County for 24 years. In that time, I've probably performed hundreds and hundreds of ADA inspections as an official, as a building inspector, and now I'm on the other side of the counter trying to use that knowledge to help businesses and government entities avoid to come into compliance and avoid litigation. It's really not necessary. Currently, I am beyond being an ADA consultant. I'm a professor at Cosumnes River College. I teach building inspection technology classes. All right. Well, today's presentation is going to be a very broad overview of ADA and what it means and where it came from. And it started in 1973 with the Federal Rehabilitation Act 504. So it's been around for a long time, and it basically says you can't discriminate. They're protected, those with disabilities are a protected class, and you can't discriminate. From 1973, so we're really logging, 50 years of or more of history, or almost 50 years of history, and we're still kind of in the dark ages when it comes to making our businesses as accessible or following the laws. And it is difficult because the laws do change. The requirements have changed. As we gain more knowledge about how to make things more accessible, and the variety, the amount of people, what we think of as people being disabled has also expanded. So and it's a very difficult thing to do a one size fits all. What you do for someone in a wheelchair may cause problems for someone who is cannot see or has vision problems, and vice versa. In 1991, the ADA, the federal law, came out with a standards. And that's the book that we, really cut the edge of, okay, well, we can't discriminate, but how do we help this? How don't we discriminate? And those standards, talk about curb cuts and bathrooms, and there's a whole variety. It touches on almost everything. And then came along and people tried to address that. There wasn't any provision for money or grants or how to do that. This law just came out and said you have to do it, or you are violating someone's civil rights. And that's a big deal. It also provided for lawsuits. If it's federal, it goes into the Department of Justice. But California in 1982 jumped on board with the 1973 federal law and opened up their own, what they thought were elements that would be made accessible, that like ramps and stairs being marked. And I mean, it was a very rudimentary attempt. And then the 1991 standards came out, and California really got on board there. In 2010, the ADA, it's called the ADAS standards, were revised, and things were added to it. I mean, everything from golf courses to picnic areas to offices to the standard things that we see in restaurants and businesses, making the doors lighter. I mean, it just goes on and on. All came into play. Now, there are some time. I think there's some of the, since these occurred, people often wonder, well, where does my building stand? Am I grandfathered in anywhere? And the answer to that is yes and no. There are certain aspects. If your building was built before 1991, or actually 92, when it was all adopted legally, you're pretty much, especially if you're out of California, you are exempt. You don't have to do anything. As long as you don't alter your building or remodel your building or add to your building, you don't have to do a thing. And that goes with the 2010 ADAS. But there are a number of things called barrier removal, readily achievable barrier removal. And there are about 21 items. And there is no grandfathering for that. So basically what the law says is that, okay, your building may have been exempt, but if you can still modify your building to make it accessible, we're gonna tell you you have to do that, period. And those are things like parking, ramps to get into the building, elevators, bathrooms, in as far as grab bars and all these different elements, lowering mirrors, changing slopes outside. So those are all essentially retroactive. That there isn't a building that in California, or for that part in the United States, that simply can cross their arms and say, I don't have to do anything because my building was built prior to that time. You still do. Let's see. In California has in its attitude towards accessibility is even goes a step further than what the federal law says. Examples of that would be in sidewalks need to be 36 inches wide. In California, they need to be 48 inches wide. And walkways and doors, even the pressure that it takes to push open a door, to pull open a door. On an exterior door in the federal law, there are no pounds there's no pound limitation for the amount of force that it takes to open the door. In California, there is, and it's 5 pounds. So either to release the latch or to push the door open can't be more than 5 pounds. in federal law, interior doors are 8.5 pounds. And again, in California stepped that up and said, no, we think that's still too heavy. We're going to go with 5 pounds on interior doors too. So California has, and that would be one of the things that would be considered readily achievable. You know, changing the how the pressure on door closers or springs is fairly easy to do. If you've ever seen someone try and pull open a door that's extremely heavy and it closes extremely quickly and it hits them in the back or pushes their chair out, or they're being bounced around on it, it's a difficult thing to see, and it's something that is, again, readily achievable and without much cost. And the law really doesn't say what much cost is, but that's something that you would be find yourself in a court of law over, is saying, what are, you know, fighting over what your revenue is and how much disposable income you have, how much time you had to make these adjustments. And being in court, as you are well aware, is very expensive, and it's a place that no one wants to be. In California, when someone sues, they go to California courts, and there are specific fines of $4,000 per violation, and it's $4,000 per violation, and there are ways to reduce that by having your property inspected. If your property is inspected, it can under it's government code 50. I can't remember the number of it, but if you have had your property inspected by a CASp, which is what I am and what I do, which is a certified access specialist, and the P stands for program. And that's a program that the state of California administers through the Department of State Architect. Very difficult test. It's been that program has been in effect for over 15 years, and there's still in the state of California only about 1,015 CASPs that have been certified. So I believe I know the code very, very well, and I still had to study it for the best part of a year and a month to pass this test. And you know, not that I'm super bright, but I do have a master's degree and I do know how to study, and it was still a tough test. So so by having that done, you're pretty much assured that you're going to have someone that has proven themselves to be competent, that's looking at all of these elements. And you got to know all the laws and all of the elements and exact measurements and where they're taken from and on and such, which is where the serial litigants come into play. Serial litigants are people who target businesses that are easy fodder. And easy fodder would be just driving through your parking lot and seeing that there are no handicap accessible space. We shouldn't use the word handicap, we should use the word accessible. There are no accessible spaces, parking spaces at all. Well, that's an easy one. You violated their civil rights. You know, point blank. If you provide parking for those people who have working body parts, but you don't provide them for those that don't, that's it. You will lose that case. And so there have been some highly predatory serial litigants, and they just we refer to them as in the business as satellite litigants, because they can go onto Google Maps, they can look at your parking lot, from an aerial, and they can know your property isn't accessible, and they file a suit against you. And I guarantee you will lose. It's just that simple. Either you have the elements or you don't. The court systems have started to really put their foot down with these serial litigants. In about 2 months ago in San Mateo, one serial litigant dropped 600 cases in just filed them all at one time and had them all served all in 1 week. Uniquely with that person, that person had been one of the most active serial litigants. He was an attorney himself who was disabled, and he overplayed his hand, and I believe it's the county of San Mateo and San Francisco both went after him for fraud, charged him with fraud, because there was enough video. He had to have a date and a time that he was at that business and was denied his civil rights, and there were enough people that were able to prove through video, security video, that he wasn't there. So we'll see where that goes, but there are still lots of serial litigants out there. And not all litigants are serial litigants. Some of them have simply had it up to here, with not being able to get into a business, or making their lives being made more difficult, or challenging, or being tipped over, or not being able to get into a business that they want to patronize, and they sue, and they do it. And for a variety of reasons. One litigant really never thought about it, but those card readers at filling stations, gasoline filling stations, where it says remove your card quickly. Well, she couldn't. Her hand, she was in a wheelchair, and her hands were like clubs, and she simply couldn't remove it fast enough for the card reader to read her card, and she had to ask for help. And that's, asking for help, seems to, for us who are able-bodied, seems to be a reasonable thing to do. Hey, if you need a hand, you need a hand. However, that's not really the point of these ADA laws. The point is that they're supposed to be able to perform the task unassisted. So, I recently had an optometrist who had a wheelchair lift on the exterior of the building, had stairs up to their building, and had a small wheelchair lift up, but you had to ring a bell, and someone had to come out and turn unlock the machine and activate the machine, so that they could use it. Well, that's not what the law says. The law says, they should be able to roll up to it unassistedly, hit that button, be able to be lifted up to the height, and let themselves out, and then go into the building. And I understood why the business didn't want it. Was for security reasons. They didn't want kids playing on it. But that's not how the law works. And that's, you would have to have some other means of security other than making the person ask for help. Protecting your business is paramount. One of the things that I prescribe the most often is being proactive. Like I said, in 1991, we really got a great body of of laws and guides and details of exactly how we should make those businesses done. There's two parts in the excuse me, in the ADAS and the California Building Code. It's called 11B. It's chapter 11B, and the two parts are: one, scoping. It tells you what and how many have to be elements have to be made accessible, and then the rest of the book beyond scoping tells you exactly how to do it. The technical side of it. So we've had some really good guides, and then in 2010 it was more refined, and it became even easier to follow them. So, based on that much time going by, and I own my own business. My wife owns her own business. I understand that particularly right now it's really tough. But if you're going to be in business and you're going to have a storefront, the law is very clear that you have to provide access. Any place that that the public goes, there has to be access. It can be very expensive, but it's something that has to be budgeted for and allocated for to improve your business as you go. Maybe it doesn't have to be all done right away, but if you chip away at it, it certainly would help you in a lawsuit showing that you have a plan. It works for the government. They're allowed to have a plan that dictates how, because they, if it sometimes there just isn't enough revenue for the whole city to become accessible, to change all the sidewalks, to change all the curb ramps, to change all the truncated domes, so they have a plan. And I would recommend any business owner to have a plan too, and to stick to it. Putting money aside for these changes, or as you do certain alterations under the building code, you will apply a certain amount of money, at 20% under, if your project is under $170,000, 20% will go to updating your accessibility. If your project is over $170,000, the law says 100% you will make that building, or at least to the alteration or to the addition, that pathway, those bathrooms that serve that will all be made fully accessible. So it's either chipping away at it through the building code, or if you do a really big project, you're going to have to do it anyway. I think we're at a point where the laws are pretty clear, and they're not changing dramatically. From the changes from 1991 to 2010 were not profound. The expansion of what needed to be, like miniature golf courses and boat ramps and things we don't really often think about. We think about restaurants because that they're sitting there and they're easy to do and easier to do, but really every place that you can run a business, or you allow the public to go on your property, has to be accessible. So having the first step in protecting your business is to have someone like myself, a CASp, to come out and evaluate your business, to step back and to go from the accessible entrance. And this is oftentimes not understood clearly enough, that you have to have an accessible route from the parking into the entrance of the building and from the public way, so from the sidewalk. So often, someone will look at their parking lot and say, "Hey, I've got accessible parking spaces." But if you look, the person, someone who's coming down the street and wants to access your business is forced to go into the path of traffic in your parking lot, right into the vehicular way, to cross to get to into the building. Well, that's not really acceptable, and especially when you think about it, in these large trucks that are all hot, up, if they start backing out of their parking space and someone's in a wheelchair, they won't, you'll never see them. And that happens sadly all too often. So you have to provide a marked accessible route from the public way and from those parking spaces. Once you get to the front door, the doors have to be evaluated. Are they the right size? Is the hardware required to have a grasping, gripping, twisting, which none of that is allowed. The litmus test for us is to make a fist, put our thumb in our fist, and then try and operate anything with that type of configuration. And if it can't be operated, it's certainly not accessible. There are descriptions and limits and that type of thing, but there's a lot of different materials out there, and there's a lot of different ways of doing things. So not all of them are addressed, but the concepts are. And that's what a CASp will do, is go from the public way into your building, and then through your building, and evaluate all those elements. If you can imagine a cellular store, you go into the cellular store, you go through the doorway, and you go into the cellular store, and everything that you can go to and the public can go and touch and view, all of that has to be accessible. The countertops and point of sale, the checkout, all has to be accessible. But on the other side of that counter, none of that has to be accessible. That's between you and your employees, especially if you have less than 15 employees. Under the federal recognition, that's not recognition, Rehabilitation Act of 1973, there's Title I says you have to make the areas for your employees accessible based on their disability. So you have to make a reasonable accommodation to meet if you have more than 15 employees. If you don't, that you're not subject to Title I. Again, Title II is the government saying, if you're gonna, if you have a government entity, you have to make everything that is like the community pool, the court systems, the schools, the office buildings that people go to, they have to be accessible. And then the Title III is the public businesses, the private businesses, I should say. Those are hotels, airplanes, transportation, everything that's private that the public is allowed to utilize. And then there's Title IV and Title V, but we won't go into those because those aren't really applicable. So there are two types of evaluations. One is called a CRASCA. That is a construction-related accessibility standards something act. I just slipped my mind. But what that is that I talked about the fines that are can be assessed. Your business can be assessed if you're sued, and that $4,000 per violation That's what the judge can assess you, let alone then there's the damages, whatever the damages that the the litigant feels that they were assessed, they're going to put a dollar amount to it, and whether it was mental, strain or stress, or their wheelchair tipped over and they were physically hurt, they're going to put a number to it. So it's both of those elements, and the judge can easily apply both the fines and award the damages to the litigant. But the CRASCA, if you file a CRASCA, if you want a CRASCA evaluation, what that means is that I'm going to do that and I'm going to report it to the Department of State Architect, and you will be registered that a CASp has inspected your property. And what that does is it gives you 4 months of basically amnesty, of a safe harbor, where one, if someone does sue you during that 4 months, the judge can only assess a $1,000 fine, and there still could be damages, but you are protected. You have this window of time to make the adjustments that are on the report. You can do all of them, you don't have, but once you have been sued and served, this CRASCA report can't be done. It can be done, but it's worthless. It doesn't hold any water. You have to do it prior to being served on the lawsuit, which is why some of the judges have said, you're gonna, to these serial litigants, you're gonna tell the business owner that they're gonna be sued, that you're ready to file the lawsuit, but you're gonna give them 30 days before I give you a case number. So you have to let them know, and in that 30 days, you have that window of, oh boy, I can I can get this CRASCA report, get it filed, and that will bar him from filing that suit if you can fix it all in that time frame. Within that 4 months, if you get a building permit to fix it, and the process takes a little bit longer and that kind of stuff, it can be extended out to those protections for 6 months. But then it becomes public information, and you get this sticker that says it's been inspected, and you put it on beside the entrance of your door, and the intent is that to take that time, that period, that window, and fix everything that shows up on the report. Sometimes that's hard to do, but for someone who is being sued, and I'll give you a brief overview of my knowledge of how these lawsuits actually go, the development and the conclusion. Someone is sued. They are told that you're going to go to court. They go seek an attorney to defend them. The attorney says, okay, the retainer's $5,000. The case, depending on whether it was filed in federal court or in California courts, that'll probably be another $10,000 for me to fight for you, and in the end, you're going to have to fix them anyway. So, and there's no guarantee that you're going to win, which you probably will not. If the elements aren't there, they're not there. It's really a black and white kind of thing, and unless you get into time frames. But it can never be one of the the 21 or 22 items of readily achievable. We're all supposed to keep up on those. So what the defendant is, the business owner is faced with, is this big bill with the attorney's fees. The odds are they're going to lose, and they're going to have to pay the damages to the person. They're going to have to pay the fines, and they're still going to have to fix the problems. So, logically, someone says, okay, well, what does this take to make it go away? And that's where these serial litigants go, well, I'll settle out of court with you. And they usually evaluate the how lucrative the business actually is, and they assess their settlement numbers on, if it's a corner little market, it's not so much. If it's an Applebee's, it's a lot. If it's a Starbucks, it's even more. It's the depth of the pockets. Typically, we see on the average small business lawsuit settlement, it's about $12,000. They tell them, we'll drop it for $12,000, and as a part of the settlement, fix your business, fix it, fix whatever's out there. And that's how most of them get settled. And I have, just last week I looked at a fast food restaurant, and they had put in $65,000 of improvements to make their business fully accessible, all the elements that needed to be, and they had to pay, this amount to make it go away. Now there's that's typically how these go. I would say that that's probably 95 to 98% of what I deal with. The other type of report is a non-CRASCA, where I'm not going to file anything with the state of California. It's just it's a confidential report between myself and the person who's paying for it, the business owner or the owner of the land or whomever. And it's the same report, the identical report, but it's just nothing. There's no disclosure to it, as far as public disclosure, and that gives somebody who has not been sued or doesn't believe that a lawsuit is impending around the corner the opportunity to start budgeting for making these repairs. When you're under the gun and it has to be done, and in these in those lawsuits that I was just talking about, there's usually a time frame. It's got to be done, as part of the settlement. It's got to be done within 30 days, and you have to pay a contractor to do a rush job. It's usually a lot more expensive than being able to chip away at it and finding someone who needs work and does good work and at a reasonable price. And nothing's filed. I have seen serial litigants target CRASCA reports that give you that 4-month window. And they know, okay, you got your 4-month window. I'm going to check back on you in 4 months and 1 day, and I'm going to go visit your establishment. And you haven't done all these things, I'm going to get you. It does happen. So sometimes it is better to just kind of fly under the radar and get it done as best you can. Always starting with the point from the public way, the sidewalk and the parking, always starting there. It's pointless to do a bathroom if you can't get in the building. It can, like I said, it can be very difficult to get your mind around it without having someone such as myself. If there are lots of opinions out there that folks kind of think they know what they're talking about, or they know pieces or parts, but a lot of times their advice is just enough to get you into a whole bunch of hot water. even building inspectors. I recently looked at a property in a jurisdiction where they had had a permit. The building inspector came out and looked at it and said, "Oh, looks good to me. That's terrific." They signed off the building permit, and the people were sued a week later, and they had all kinds of problems. And I'll tell you why that happens is because for the average inspector, they do a lot of construction inspections. They're looking at framing and electrical and plumbing and mechanical. But at the very final part of the building, they have so much to look at. They don't actually take levels out and determine slopes and measure, you know, is the sidewalk 47 3/4 of an inch, or is it truly 48? A lot of it's just done visually. In a CASp report, it is done hands-on measurements of every different element, you know, using electronic levels and all this type of stuff that we get it down to an absolute science. It can cost you $12,000 to $25,000 if the ramp that you just put in, that the contractor said he knew what he was doing and he was going to make it right, is at 2.5% slope, whereas the maximum is 2%. And you know, they've done all this work and they've poured all this concrete and it's too steep. Visually, you can't tell the difference between, you know, if the average person can't tell the difference between 2% and 2.5 or 2.1 and 2. But 2.1, I've seen it. I have absolutely seen lawsuits over it being you know, someone went beyond the maximum. So as a CASp, we offer our services before the problem has occurred to give, during construction, you can hire us to double check your contractor to make sure that before they pour that concrete, that they're doing everything right. That's I highly recommend that. So you don't, you know, it's not having to be, you know, the argument of tearing it out and, oh, well, the building inspector said it was fine, but this CASp guy comes in and says it's not fine. Well, what do we do? Well, it's too late, you know, it's a little late, you know, then, but it doesn't have to be. These lawsuits are 100% avoidable. 100%. We can keep you out of those lawsuits by, you know, being able to break the elements down and being specific and guiding you into how to correct them and what needs to be corrected. The other part is when it's all done. You know, I have been called in numerous times to just, when it's all finalized, can I get a clearance? Can I say it was inspected and a CASp, a report that says, hey, everything's great. Do those too. Highly recommend those. And it's you know, it is, I'm thinking about my words carefully here. It is sad when you know, these lawsuits occur because there are if it's not a predatory serial litigant, it's hard on the business, it's hard on the individual, it is avoidable. You know, I do see, you know, both sides of the argument. You know, what other avenue does someone who, you know, has to travel down to the opposite corner of the block to get up, you know, up a curb that was never cut into the sidewalk, and has to travel down the you know, the length of the roadway out in the path of traffic? what's it take, to, it's been 25, 30 years since we've had law here in California that, um, they're left with very few alternatives except to sue. You know, uh, you know, I highly suggest that every business owner know what their liabilities and exposures are, and at least develop a plan. You can do it before you buy the property, before you lease the property. And by the way, the law says before you lease the property, the leaseor is supposed to advise you, disclose that you have the right to have that property evaluated. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to fix it. It just means you're doing an inspection. So there are so many points to avoid these lawsuits and avoid heartache and avoid higher levels of expense along the way by simply knowing what your responsibilities are and utilizing people like myself to the CASps to evaluate your property. I highly recommend it. I mean, if it's not obvious from my descriptions, we're here to help. We really are. I spent a whole career in trying to affect a change on as a building inspector, but it doesn't always work, and it from that angle, but it certainly can work. It certainly can work for you as a business owner. All right. Well, I think I have covered most of what I had prepared to cover, but I'm open for any questions that you can throw at me. Happy to answer them. I have my reference books here. I'm open and willing to help.
So Timothy, my question was similar to Don's. Like I'm someone who definitely needs, I think, like written and visual materials to fully digest a lot of this, I think, more technical information. So I was curious if, in addition to like recommended references, if you have any write-ups of your own or even like one-pagers that detail some of this information that we could hopefully circulate with folks in our network and ideally translate into multiple languages.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. The finest resource to go to is the law, and that is the California Building Code, the most current edition, and Chapter 11. It's got pictures and diagrams and descriptions, but even so, I can certainly show you some pictures if you go to my website, which is guardianada.com. I have pictures of violations and that you wouldn't normally think that are non-compliant issues, and why they're non-compliant. So you can go there. It's kind of an interactive site, kind of a, guess what's wrong with this picture, and there's an answer there. Resources, there just, and you have identified a wonderful issue. There just aren't a lot of resources that are digestible to someone who isn't professional. It will make your head spin. And especially the laws that apply to each situation. I mean, even myself, in evaluating a business, I can say I go to San Francisco, and there's a building that was built in 1920. Well, okay, what body of laws am I applying to it? When did they have work done, when, you know, there's just the history, going through the history is you know, the first step, and that's daunting, can be daunting. There's a checklist which I'll be happy to send you. This checklist is produced by the city of San Francisco. They call it, their department is called the DBI, the Department of Building Inspection, and they have a program right now that's been going on for the last 4 years or so. That's called ABE, ABE, Accessible Building Entrance Program, where every building in the city of San Francisco and the county of San Francisco that is open to the public has to have their entrance evaluated. And this checklist has to be filled out by a CASp, someone like myself, and pictures have to be taken and sent into the city, and it's documented as if it is compliant, or there's 4 different categories on it, you know, ranging from it's perfect to, oh boy, there's a flight of stairs to get up to the business with no elevators or anything like that. What do we do now? But I'd be happy to make a copy of it, because I think it's just a 2-page document, and it highlights, you know, the different items that they're looking for, which makes it easy for someone to at least get the Fisher-Price Reader's Digest version of, oh, what should I be looking for, you know, on my property. But you know, I will do my best to think of other resources, but I urge great caution. I kind of I kind of see. Oh, okay. Yeah. If you hold on for a quick second, I saw your question of what are the 21 things that are considered. I've got it in front. I've got the building code in front of me. This is my and this is the current code, scoping requirements, and I can send this off to Manny, and I can make a copy and send it to her. But the items I said, I think there were 21. I think it's actually 19 are listed here, but it's they're barrier removal is considered number one is installing ramps, 2, making curb cuts in sidewalks and entrances, repositioning shelves, rearranging tables, chairs, vending machines, display racks, and other furniture. And for those of you who own businesses, 50% of that number 3, repositioning shelves or rearranging tables, chairs, vending machines, display racks, so that they're below 48 inches, the upper aspect of the reach range. Repositioning telephones. These are public telephones. If you have them, that's kind of gone to the wayside because everyone's got cell phones. You don't see a lot of payphones any longer. Adding raised markings on elevator control buttons, installing flashing alarm lights. That would be the strobe lights in the bathrooms when the fire alarms go off. Someone who's deaf doesn't know that there's a fire, but they can see the strobe lights. Adding, installing widening doors. Doors have to be a minimum of 32 inches. Installing offset hinges to widen doorways. Eliminating a turnstile or providing an alternative accessible route. 11 is installing accessible door hardware. 12, installing grab bars in toilet stalls. Rearranging toilet partitions to increase maneuvering space. Insulating lavatory, that's the sink in the wash basin in a bathroom, in a restroom, rather. Insulating lavatory pipes under the sinks to prevent burns. Installing a raised toilet seat, installing a full-length bathroom mirror, repositioning the paper towel dispenser in the bathroom, creating designated accessible parking spaces, removing high pile, low density carpeting. Now, those are the 19, excuse me, and I said 21, but it's 19 items that they identify. However, there's a catch-all. It says it includes these items, but it is not limited to one or more of the following items. So a serial litigant could say, well, there's 19 things, but I feel item 20, that this item would have been easy to change. And that would be things like in a marketplace store, where if you have display shelves, or you have overstocked material that partially obstructs an aisleway, or where your lottery ticket, to be able to fill out, a lottery ticket, doesn't have that room, where it ends in a dead end. Those are all things that are considered readily achievable, but they were not listed as those number 19. That's why as those 19 items. So it can be much broader too, and we have to look at case law, which is why I want to be so careful in trying to provide someone guidance through literature that is easy to grab onto, items that aren't fully understood, or you haven't read the recent case law. Perfect example, a parking space has to be a minimum of 9 feet measured from the middle of the blue painted lines on the asphalt. But a recent court case said that, well, if you have a concrete curb as one part of the parking space, and the other part of the parking space is a painted line, you start measuring from the face of that curb. So what it means is that that parking space has to be 3 inches wider if there's a concrete curb to it. But that's not what the code says, but that's what the law, the most recent law interpretation is. That's why hiring a CASp is really the best way to go, because each property has such individual dynamics. I hope that helped. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
And there was another question from Dawn. She asked, what's the typical cost of CASp inspections to make recommendations?
Great. So it depends on whether it's the CRASCA, the one with the filing, there's extra steps, and there's documentation and that kind of stuff, versus non-CRASCA, which is just client, the CASp reports. Typically, you could expect for a guideline, just a real basic guideline is my fees are $1,500 for the first 2,500 square feet of business. But again, it changes, dynamics. I think the least amount, the basic amount that you're gonna have someone, a CASp, come out and do it, the very simplest one might be $1,200. I don't think you're going to get any kind of evaluation done less than $1,200, and that's typically, let's say, a donut shop, where you're doing the sidewalk, the parking lot, the entranceway, and then there's one case, you know, and you order and you leave. That would be one of the more simple, where there's no bathrooms, um, you know, there's no elevators or there's nothing of that sort. Somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500, that would be a basic amount. Now, it would go up based on the complexity. If you have a Home Depot that has, you know, 250 parking spaces, and you have all these different routes, and you have different entrances, and you have bathrooms in one area, you have, it can get very large, and they're priced individually. You know, based on, like I said, the complexity. And it really, what's going to drive the cost up is the area that the public is allowed to go to. You know, I would say a typical 7-Eleven would be $1,500 to $1,700. Now, if it's got, gas pumps, which have to be evaluated differently, it might be a little bit more, it may be the same. You know, it just based on its age, based on, and if they're already in a lawsuit, you can expect that it's going to be a little bit more if they've already been sued, because there's a lot of T crossing and I dotting, because there's an anticipation that we're going to be called into court. Not that we don't take the same care for a non-CRASCA, it's just a little different. There's a different level of documentation versus, the technical side of it. Did that help? Good.